why might we have resistance to ritual and ceremony, and what real difference does ritual and ceremony make in our lives and to living more fully and actualizing our gifts? So first of all, even though it's probably in some ways obvious, I'm just going to quickly define what's meant by ritual and ceremony, which will make it then easier as I'm explaining the rest of the answer to this. So ritual typically is seen as like something that we do repeatedly. So dictionary definitions will mention things like a repeated set of actions. So typically a ritual is something we might do with quite a lot of frequency. So like daily or weekly. It's something that we repeat, you know, could be quite short, could be like a 5-minute thing that we do every morning. So that typically is what's meant by ritual. A ceremony typically is bigger and less frequent. Again, I'm saying typically in both because they can be used interchangeably. And even when I was looking at the dictionary definition of ceremony, it mentioned a ritual with religious or cultural significance, which doesn't make complete sense because often rituals have religious or cultural significance. But the key thing is, it then says an official gathering to celebrate, commemorate, or otherwise mark some event. So a helpful way to look at ceremony is, you know, celebrating Christmas is a ceremony. It's a kind of once a year ceremony. And so again, typically a ceremony will be something often involving more than one person. It doesn't have to be, but often will. May not be as frequent as a ritual, and often has this kind of like a big significance where we're really marking some event or commemorating some event. So the important thing to recognize is ritual and ceremony have been around for, you know, as long as we've been able to record what humans have done. It is an intensely human thing to do. In some ways, you could say to be human is to invoke ritual and ceremony. Of course, in this modern world, it appears that to a large extent, we're no longer involved in ritual and ceremony, but that's an illusion. It is so human to be in ritual and ceremony. We still are. It's just largely unconscious. And so just to recognize that in itself is really helpful. It's unlikely to be actually new to anyone to be in ritual and ceremony. The difference is when we're saying resistance to ritual and ceremony, it's really about conscious, aligned ritual and ceremony. That's where the resistance will come. But to even recognize, well, actually, I'm already in ritual and ceremony. It's just the fact that it's not conscious to me. I don't even realize I've chosen it, that it can seem as though it's a big leap to making conscious ritual and ceremony. So to answer that first part of the question, why might we have resistance to ritual and ceremony? I think a lot of it is the fact it feels this kind of like unknown, big, scary thing, and a bit weird, a bit kind of like, I'm a fraud. It's only for people who are, I don't know, more magical or spiritual and have been trained in this, and just not recognizing like this is human. This is our human birthright. It's in our DNA. It's in our blood and bones. If you're listening to this, I can pretty much guarantee you are in some form of ritual and ceremony on a very regular basis. So just, I really want you to hear that. You're already doing it. You're doing it beautifully. The invitation is actually to now make it conscious. So that's the first part of the question. And I'm going to give us some examples of like very typical unconscious rituals we might be in. Brushing our teeth is one. And interesting, that came up in the book that I mentioned earlier about alchemy. And he was talking again about this, asking the deeper why. And it was talking about the question of why do people brush their teeth? And most people will go to kind of things like, well, it, you know, reduces plaque and bacteria and stops you getting cavities. But when you actually look at the behavior of when people brush their teeth, it doesn't really align that rationally with that reason to do it. As he says in the book, if that's why people brush their teeth, people would brush their teeth after every meal, not just morning and evening. And the fact is, most people don't brush their teeth after every meal. And he's saying the real why can be, again, looked at when we look at why people brush their teeth. Part of it is just that kind of conditioning, like, oh, I'm just going to do that because it's what we do. But it's also, you know, when you look at the times when we break outside of that routine, when we might be, for example, going on a hot date, most people will brush their teeth. So a lot of it's done for much more kind of like what looks good, smells look like, the aesthetics of what gets created by brushing our teeth. So recognize often when we do these rituals, we're unconscious to even doing the ritual, but we may well be unconscious to why we're doing the ritual too. We may think we know why we do it, but we actually don't. Another one is checking our phone. That ritual of God knows how many times a day, and like a really like, you know, unconscious reflex, like look at my phone, look at my phone. That's another ritual that, you know, most people are in on a God knows how many times a day basis. So the difference, so going to that second part of the question, what real difference does ritual and ceremony make in our lives? The question really is, what real difference does, sorry, the dogs are knocking at the door. I'm going to see if I can get a family member to help. The question really ought to be, what real difference does conscious ritual and ceremony, or aligned, you know, ritual and ceremony that's chosen and consciously chosen to align with soul? Thank you. And the difference is, this is, I'm going to take a moment because this is huge. This really, there is so much of our will, our soul that can be created in ritual and ceremony. It's hard for me to overstate this. When we are intentionally embarking on ritual and ceremony that again is in aligned for our soul, we are embodying what we came here for. It can seem as though what we're doing in a ritual is just kind of going through some motions, but what we're actually doing, again, assuming it is a very conscious aligned ritual, what we're actually doing is embodying in the movement of the very thing that we're here to do. And so the last, I think it's the last All the Everything, that was the one before that I did with Sarah about the feminine. I spoke there about some of the rituals that I do every morning. Those rituals I do every morning are me deeply embodying the feminine, a very conscious act of invocation. It isn't just a mindless ritual. It isn't just a kind of set of things I'm doing. It's me acting out my will in that ritual, which then goes on to impact the rest of my day. That ritual is literally an embodiment of my soul, an embodiment of my will. And I'm going to talk briefly to archetypes here. I was actually pondering, I don't know why it came into my awareness, but I was pondering archetypes this morning. As you know, it's something that I'm obsessed by, is, you know, absolutely huge in the work we do at Waking the Wild. And I was thinking about how, I don't know how many years ago it was before I really understood what archetypes truly were and how important they'd become to my path. So I don't know how many years ago about it, maybe 6 years ago. I was doing a course, a year-long course with someone, and part of it was around archetypes. And it left me, that aspect of the course left me cold. Like at the time, I would have been so shocked if you were to say, I would go on to have the relationship with archetypes that I have now. Like I would have been like what? This, like the whole archetypes bit, it just feels like absolute nonsense to me. Like that's where I was. Like I literally thought it was a waste of time. Like, just like fantastical nonsense, but like the worst kind of fantastical nonsense, like not even that interesting, just a complete waste of time. That's how I was seeing it. I don't honestly know whether that was the way that teacher was teaching them, whether perhaps she hadn't really embodied those archetypes that she was teaching, it may be that it wasn't down to her at all. It was just where I was and the fact I wasn't yet open to them. I honestly don't know. But all I can say is at the time, for whatever reason, and potentially partly the way they were taught, but again, I'm not making this about that teacher or anything like that. But my sense is the way that they were taught, or certainly what I was open to taking in, wasn't allowing me to connect with the archetypes in the way that I now understand is not just possible, but is like one of the most powerful things I've experienced in my entire life. So how this links to ritual and ceremony is, without ritual and ceremony, we aren't really going to be able to move past a very theoretical understanding of archetypes. Archetypes are brought alive, are embodied through ritual and ceremony. One way or another, I would say, actually, if you were to take ritual and ceremony, across the world, I would say a large number of them, one way or another, are about the embodiment of archetypes, or what we could say is spirits. The two things come together so powerfully, so naturally. And so, again, given so much of our work is about archetypes, recognizing that this is, if you've got any understanding of the power of archetypes to just expand you, to bring you into the fullness of who you are, you will really want to adopt ceremony and rituals. This is literally how they can change your life. Because if you are on a daily basis, and I'm just going to give the simplest example of this, if you're on a daily basis, have a ritual to invoke the archetype that you're here to embody, here to be inspired by, to be activated by. Every single morning, you are in a ritual that does that. That is your life. That is how it changes your life. What you are embodying, what you are activating, what you are calling into being in that ritual is your life. So, as you can hear, I'm passionate about this. But for me, and again, I came from a background, a kind of form of spiritual teaching, which was almost like not just devoid of ritual and ceremony, but kind of like, I'd say fairly dismissive at best of ceremony and ritual. So if you've come from, say, for example, a form of spiritual teaching, or just maybe like it's just not even been in your awareness as something to do, I really get it. It can seem as though it's just like unnecessary, like pomp and performance. Why do we need that if we can kind of just directly connect with spirit? If I can know myself as, whatever way we might want to name it, if I can know myself as one, why would I want to, go through these like silly sort of play acting? And again, if you are here to embody your soul, if you're here to align with your soul, you will greatly benefit